right, welcome back. We're excited to be back here with round 4 of our Grove series as we look at this book, Generation Z Unfiltered. I hope you found this super insightful and hopefully beneficial. And as you've had these discussions in your Grove, that hopefully new insight has helped you kind of unpack it and really think about it and how we can truly prepare this next generation. What I want to do tonight is to really kind of go back to something we talked about on Sunday morning in our God's Top 10 series. If you remember on week 2, we talked about this idea of not making an image in the image of God or image for God, or make an idol in the image of God, or kind of create your own God in that sense. And in that passage, if you remember, there was something I said, hey, we'll talk about this in Groves. And you're probably like, well, what does this mean? And so that's what we want to unpack today in our Groves. And so I want to read Deuteronomy chapter 5, verses 8 through 10. So in 8, it says, "You shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven above or on the earth below or in the waters below." We talked about this. Don't try to tell God how you're going to worship him. Allow God to dictate how we worship him. And then it says this in verse 9, "You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God." It's this idea that God is actually jealous for us, or jealous for his name, or jealous for who he is. That he doesn't want us misrepresenting him. And then he says this kind of tough passage, I guess. He says, "Punishing the children for the sin of the parents to the 3rd and 4th generation of those who hate me." And then in verse 10, "But showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments." And at first read, it may kind of almost sound as if God's like issuing a generational curse. Like, if you don't follow me, then it's going to be cursed your whole family from generation to generation to generation to generation. It's not just going to impact you, it's going to impact your kids and your grandkids. And then the last part there, he's saying, hey, but if you do love me, if you do pursue me, if you do respect me and love me, then hey, the blessings are going to be poured upon you for 1,000 generations. And so at first read, it may almost sound like God saying, hey, what you do, their kids are going to pay for it. And it's interesting because if you read a little bit later in the Old Testament, you get to this passage in Ezekiel chapter 18, and it's almost as if God's trying to, well, you guys kind of misunderstood what I was saying in number 2, so let me kind of clarify. And so this is what it says in Ezekiel chapter 18. Verse 19, let's start there. It says, "Yet you ask, why does the son not share the guilt of his father? Since the son has done what is just and right, has been careful to keep all my decrees, he will surely live." And then it says this in verse 20, "The one who sins is the one who will die. The child will not share the guilt of the parent, nor will the parent share the guilt of the child. The righteousness of the righteous will be credited to them, and the wickedness of the wicked will be charged against them." Verse 21, I'll read that one. "But if a wicked person turns away from all the sins they have committed and keeps all my decrees and does what is just and right, that person will surely live. They will not die." It's kind of this idea that, because it's kind of true. In essence, what we do as parents, what generation 1 does when it comes to generation 2 or generation 3, the generations that follow us, our kids' generation, our grandkids' generation, the reality is what we do does impact them greatly. And so the sins, you see this all the time. If you look around the world, you see the sins of a father, sins of the mother, it gets kind of passed down because the kids have to pay the price for what their kids do. It isn't that the kids necessarily sinned, it's that they kind of inherited this legacy, if you will, of sin against God. And so they were taught, hey, worship idols, or hey, create your own image of God, or hey, do whatever you want, don't listen to God. And so you kind of inherit that from your parents. And kind of what God is trying to get across to us in this passages is saying, although that is true, everybody's sin is upon their own heads. And so God doesn't judge generation 2 because the generation 1 screwed up. He says, you have your own shot. You have your own chance to repent and turn back to me, and then you will be blessed. But if you follow the paths of your fathers ahead of you, then you're going to reap the same punishment as your parents did. You're going to reap the same hell, if you will, that your father did or your mother did. But he's saying, if you will turn back to me, then all that can be erased and you can experience my grace and my glory and you can be blessed. And so what that kind of means to me as we kind of look at this Generation Z is this idea that, you know what, a lot of what they have inherited isn't necessarily their fault, and they could just point at, the generation above them saying they're the ones that made us this way, it's their fault, they're to blame. But I think God's saying to them, he's saying, hey, you are responsible for yourselves. But he's saying to us as well, hey, be responsible for those below you so that they can be blessed by me and they can follow me. And so I guess it's an idea that I just really want us to get across, that what we do does impact the next generation for good or for bad. What our parents did ahead of us impacted us for good or for bad. What our grandparents did ahead of us impacted us for positive or for negative. But we're responsible for what we do. We don't just get to have this, oh, it's their fault, and so we just inherited this, and so, oh, well. No, we want to do what we can, like we're saying in this series, to invest and prepare the next generation, to be the responsible ones, to be the ones that God can say, hey, I'm going to bless this generation and the generation after it and the generation after that because you love me and you seek me, and so I can just pour out these blessings generationally upon you. But if you don't, then I can't, and I won't. And so you will suffer the consequences of your sin. You will suffer the consequences of your own sin, your own generational sin. And so hopefully that maybe clears it up a little bit for you. And hopefully as you continue reading and talking and discussing, you can really take to heart this idea that, hey, we want to be the ones that bless the next generation. At Rising Church, we want to be a church that blesses the next generation, does everything we can to prepare them so that we can have this generational legacy of blessing that goes down and down and down and further and further and further beyond ourselves. That when we pass away, we can look back and say, man, I did what I could to pass on the love of God to this generation. So hopefully that's a little bit of food for thought as you get started this week. I hope you have a great discussion, and we will see you next week.